Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this high-level panel. We're so pleased that you're all here. I hope you've been having a good conference so far. Now, before we start this session, I encourage you all to please stand up and join me in welcoming Her Royal Highness, Crown Princess Victoria of Sweden, who's going to be joining our session.
Water is a resource with many shapes and forms, and by nature, it connects different environments, peoples, and sectors. Water is irreplaceable for life to survive and thrive. Water is a unifying and catalyzing force. It can be the deal maker for creating a more sustainable world.
Water underpins all of our social and economic activity. Without water, food production stops. Cities cease to function. Economic activity grinds to a halt, and fertile land turns into a desert.
We have massive challenges in front of us, and to steer the world in the right direction, we need to join forces and take action. The UN 2023 Water Conference will be this moment.
Tajikistan and the Netherlands, as co-hosts of the conference, strive to make it a watershed moment for the world. So let's join our efforts, take commitments and put actions on the ground to make this happen.
We have an important task to encourage all stakeholders, to bring together all our pledges, promises and commitments, and to make clear how the world will reach its water-related goals.
Many things were politically unclear at that time. Now, the young leaders should be given a leading role by their governments in order to be active in the next decade.
Water does not only pose a challenge, it also presents us with great opportunity. We need to act and foster a fundamental shift in how we look at and manage water more than ever.
Imagine what kind of world we could live in if its leaders had just a fraction of the idealism that we share as young people.
What a great film, and what a great way to start this session, which is about the UN 2023 Water Conference. Well, first of all, warmest of welcomes to Her Royal Highness, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. We indeed have a fantastic presence here today. I'm Alok Jha. I'm a science and technology correspondent at The Economist newspaper, and I've also written a book about water, so these issues are all things that are very close to my heart. I'll be guiding you through today's event. Now, you might have already met me as one of the MCs in the other sessions and on Centre Stage this week. This high-level panel will be on the topic, Harnessing Global Development Agendas on the Road to 2023. It's convened by the Kingdom of the Netherlands and the Stockholm International Water Institute. This is the 5th edition of this event, and this time we're focusing on the Water Action Decade. With only 7 months to go until the UN 2023 Water Conference, this event is extremely timely. So let's get started. We have a lot to pack in. Our first speaker is His Excellency Abdullah Shahid, President of the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Mr. Shahid will join us with a video message and speak about the UN 2023 Water Conference and the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda.
Excellencies, access to water is a universal right, and ensuring that right is a universal obligation. Acting on this is critical, especially at this time as clean and fresh water is necessary to support a sustainable and resilient recovery from COVID-19 pandemic. Yet, even before the pandemic, we were struggling to meet the targets outlined in the Sustainable Development Goal 6 on access to clean water and sanitation. In the post-pandemic context, the situation has become dire. Today, 2.2 billion people live without access to safe water, and more than 700 million people are at risk of being displaced due to water scarcity by 2030. This is compounded by a raging climate crisis and its drastic consequences on water availability. As temperatures soar, longer droughts are becoming more frequent and the weather grows more unpredictable. This directly affects the availability and distribution of rainfall, snowmelt, river flows, and groundwater. The quality of already available water continues to deteriorate due to a variety of factors, including pollution. We must urgently accelerate initiatives aimed at addressing the challenges related to water resources. Climate adaptation strategies in managing water resources must be implemented to ensure everyone has access to clean water. The need for this grows more pressing with a rising population that is expected to reach 8 billion by this November, causing increasing demand for water and stress on existing resources. Water scarcity is not only a crisis by itself, but it has several spillover effects. It undermines our health and food security and has the potential to trigger further displacements, refugee crisis, and political instability. My dear friends, for these reasons, it is important that we raise awareness on water-related issues and put them front and center in our multilateral discussions. Only by giving this issue the serious attention it deserves can we generate effective strategies, identify best practices, and integrate water management tools. It is not yet too late to enact meaningful change, but we must work collectively and with purpose if we are to achieve internationally agreed water-related goals and targets, including those contained in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. To this end, let us build upon the commitments and initiatives made during COP26 in Glasgow, Stockholm +50, the Dushanbe Water Conference, the UN Ocean Conference, and the ECOSOC High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. We need to build momentum as we prepare for the UN 2023 Water Conference in March next year. Let us recommit to solving water-related issues and water scarcity, which have such profound repercussions environmentally, economically, socially, and on global sustainable development itself. Excellencies, together we can build a more inclusive and effective path for the achievement of the 2030 Agenda in the context of Water Decade of Action running from 2018 to 2028. Together we can guarantee the right to clean and fresh water to all our communities. I thank you.
Many thanks for that, Mr. President Shahid. A very urgent message, I think you'll agree. Now we're going to turn our attention to the young professionals and youth leaders for a conversation on their view of the state of action on global agendas and the need to perhaps accelerate efforts. Let me introduce our two speakers. If you can come up on stage. They are Carolina Tornesi-McKinnon, President of the World Youth Parliament for Water, and Joanne Tanui, who is the founder of Green Towns Initiative Kenya, who has expertise on the global food agenda. You can sit, you can stand, wherever you like. I'm going to ask you questions from here, if you don't mind. Joanne, I'm going to ask you first, from your standpoint as a young leader, where do we stand on achieving the sort of global development agendas that everyone talks about here, especially when it comes to the goals related to water?
Thank you so much for the question. And I'm so excited, first of all, to be here in Stockholm. It's my first time here, and I'm very excited. What I think that my standpoint in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, we are still far behind from achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. We might put a blame on the COVID-19 pandemic, but even before the pandemic, we were still far behind from achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. We do not want to repeat the mistake that we did in the Millennium Development Goals. There were so many challenges or reasons that led to the failure of MDGs. But one of the universal challenges that I feel was the major cause of its failure was the lack of full ownership of the Sustainable Development Goals, especially in the most remote areas. Where I come from, I believe only a few people understand what SDGs are, and we need to create awareness to inform the people in the communities and in the local communities to understand the Sustainable Development Goals and what we want to achieve with the Sustainable Development Goals. Because we say that we are leaving no one behind, yet we are leaving so many people behind. We only, some of us who are here, we only, I can say all of us, we understand what SDGs are, but there are people in the remotest areas who do not understand what SDGs are. So we need to fully empower people and create awareness on that. Thank you.
So your argument there is that, of course, that the SDGs are well known to groups like this, but for people on the ground, perhaps it's not something they think about all the time, and it's an important educational response that we need to have to educate people. Carolina, on the other side of that, what do you kind of expect from world leaders at this point? And you can be honest here. Given that there's been quite a little action on many fronts, do you get worried that people of your generation and beyond will have to deal with a much bigger burden?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question and having me here. I think I'll start with the negative and end on the positive. As far as how I'm sure it makes Joanne and myself and the rest of the people in my generation, it's a bit frustrating and aggravating to have all of this data, all of this science that's been coming out for years and improving as well and getting more specific and seeing no action. I'm sure, or I hope you've heard of climate depression. It's usually in young people when they think about the future and that there's nothing to be done and no one's doing enough. We sit up here, we're youth. Are we wasting our 20s trying to push for change that just won't come and we just have to wait when it's our time to lead? But on the more positive side of things, I do think there's a change. I do feel empowered. I mean, even being here on stage, kicking off this event, that's a huge step forward. And what we're looking for, what I'm looking for, is action for leaders to really have a collaborative global mindset. So obviously starting local, listening there, but working together, not so much us versus them, youth versus older generation, etc. We're all in this together. Water touches everybody's lives, so we need to work together. And my final ask, I added this a bit last minute, but I was thinking, of our water leaders, of our decision makers, become a mentor from someone out of network. The baton is going to be passed, and I think it would do us all well if we're well prepared, understand what's happening, and are able to communicate our ideas and innovation upward.
Thank you very much. I love last-minute additions, and that was a very good one. I think the idea of mentorship and learning across the generations is so important. Joanne, how closely linked do you think the water and food problems are, and how do you sort of seek to sort of connect those things in the groundwork that you're doing in your communities?
Yes, so thank you. As you all know that water is life, water is the source of everything. And when we're speaking of water, sustainable practices that will not affect or negatively impact the water resources that we have. So in where I come from, the major sources of water is rivers and springs and lakes. But there are so many malpractices or unsustainable ways of tapping into these naturally existing water resources, which means that people are only concerned with what they get right now, but they are not thinking about the future generation. So what will the future generation get if we unsustainably tap into these natural resources that we have right now? So my thinking is, if we have sustainable ways of using the natural resources, we are able to secure and we are able to protect the natural resources that we have for the future generation. For instance, agricultural practices, over 70% of water is used in agriculture. So these practices, malpractices, are as a result of poor agricultural practices, especially planting crops along the riverbanks or irrigation along the riverbanks, which you are actually negatively impacting that natural flow of rivers. We should restore these water resources. We should do sustainable water management along the riverbanks and also along the lakes and in the springs, so as to ensure that the future generation will not lack water and also will not lack food.
Thank you, Joanne. Karina, if I could describe you as an organizer of people, you're an organizer. How do you think that communities like this one here at this conference and in this room can purposefully and actively engage more marginalized communities? What can they do to help you bring those marginalized communities, and I also mean the youth in that, into this discussion to help achieve some of these grand ambitions?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a bit simple, the answer. It's purposeful outreach, not looking for a specific answer, but looking for specific types of inclusion, creating the space and then making it safe as well. I would say that water in general is a risk-averse area. And so if we don't already have past sense of trust, we're scared to trust a new group. So I'd ask everybody to trustfully reach out, knowing that there are different types of experts all around the world in marginalized communities, and we need to trust that what they're saying, they know what they're saying, and we need to try and implement that and listen better. And listen for receiving and then into action, not in a combative sense or comparing.
Hearing from you is continuously is kind of on the same track, which is mentorship, education, early communication to be able to build trust, and then that goes forward. That seems like a very sensible sort of set of ideas. Now, the question for both of you, the UN 2023 Water Conference is coming up. I'd love to know what you both would love that to achieve. What do you think, Joanne, what do you think that would need to do for it to be successful in your view?
Yes, thank you. So we need to engage the youth. Youth are the change makers across the world. So we need to engage the youth in looking for innovative ways for sustainable solutions for water, for food, for climate change. Because the youth, for myself, there are so many other youth who have ideas, but they do not know the ways of implementing those ideas. So we need to engage them and empower them with knowledge. Knowledge is power. So we need to empower them with knowledge and how to implement the ideas, because the ideas, I believe, are very sustainable and they will bring solutions to the many challenges that we have had in so many years.
Okay, well, that's a very clear hope. And Karina, how about you? What do you think will be a good, successful outcome of the conference?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Joanne has said, and to add to that, real actionable outcome and commitments from our leaders. I think it's quite simple. And also, we've been told we have to quadruple our efforts. So to take that into consideration as we look at what kind of commitments, I mentioned this previously in a different talk, but quadrupling isn't going to come from nowhere. You need to involve the youth and traditionally marginalized groups because you functionally need more people to make this change happen.
Okay, and another question, which I don't want to end this on a negative note, but maybe something constructive, which is that, of course, if people don't do anything, if things don't change, there's going to be problems. I'd like to know from you both, maybe give a warning of what the risks are of inaction. Karina, maybe you can start.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
What were the risks of inaction if nothing happens?
Yeah.
What are we sort of going to lose?
Thank you. I mean, we'd lose the world that we live in, everything we've built, thinking about the future, and hope. I think that that's something that's quite dangerous. We don't want to lose hope, and we don't want to lose the community we've built, the habitats. So there's a lot at stake, but it does feel like people want change, and I'm hopeful for that.
And Joanne, what's at stake for you? What's the risk of not acting?
We will have to go back to the drawing board again. and that will take huge time. The time wasted is the time that should have been taken to implement what the ideas that the youth, the marginalized groups, and the women have. So the risk of inaction is time wasted, and that time should have been used for something sustainable.
Well, it sounds to me like neither of you will let inaction happen, so I think we're okay on that front. Thank you very much, Joanne and Carolina. I hope this message is heard loud and clear everywhere. Young people want to be part of the decisions that will affect them. They have so much to contribute. Thank you very much, both of you, for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, we need more dialogue between different generations and people from many backgrounds, of course. And that's, of course, what we're going to do with us now as we move on to the next segment of the high-level panel. And one by one, if I can introduce the panelists onto stage, we're going to be hearing from leading actors working on various global development agendas. Let me introduce the panelists one by one, and then we're going to hear from them after that. First, we're going to be hearing from the COP27 hosts, Egypt, on where we stand on the international climate agenda. We have the honor to be joined by both Mr. Hani Swalem, Egyptian Minister for Water Resources and Irrigation, and also Mr. Sherif Essa, Egyptian Assistant Foreign Minister. Can I welcome you both on stage, please? Can I have a round of applause? Just as a... Thank you very much. If you can sit just at the end there, that would be great. Thank you so much. After our discussions on climate, we will move on to talk about oceans and source to sea. Here, we'll be hearing from Mrs. Isabella Lövin, who's co-chair of the Friends of Ocean Action, chair of the Stockholm Environmental Institute, and former Deputy Prime Minister of Sweden. Please welcome Mrs. Lövin. Please take a seat. Our next topic is going to be biodiversity. We've got the pleasure of being joined online by Mrs. Florica Fink-Huija. She is the European Commission Director General for the Environment. I don't know if she's on the link already, but she will be here shortly. There she is, in fact, right behind me. There we go. Welcome. Last but not least, we'll cover the topic of disaster risk reduction. We're going to be excited to hear from Mr. Ricardo Mena, Director of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. Ricardo, please come on stage. Now, we're very pleased to have such a broad and competent panel providing us with the opportunity to learn about where we stand on the global questions. Now, additionally, to reach the goals of the 2030 agenda, there's going to be interaction necessary between the global level and the local levels. And that means raising the perspectives of those who are usually left unheard. So in this session, between each panelist, we'll also hear some inspiring stories from the ground about topics covered by the high-level speakers. So let's begin with one of those storytelling videos. This is from a UNFCCC high-level champion youth fellow, Mrs. Tukelo Shai from South Africa.
Hello, my name is Tukelo Shai, and my mission is to accelerate the transition to a healthy and sustainable planet for all. My motivation is rooted in memories of my childhood when my father used to take my sisters and I to visit my grandmother, a smallholder farmer. There was no electricity or running tap water at the time, so we used to spend our days plowing the fields, fetching fuelwood, and going to the dam to collect water. Although the experience showcased some of the structural gaps and vulnerability of rural livelihoods, I bared witness to some of the smartest innovations in resource management. The experience taught me what it meant to live off the land, to reduce, to regenerate, and reuse. When I think about the theme of this week, seeing the unseen, the value of water, I reflect back to this memory. To me, water has always been a precious resource, and the smallholder farmers within my community that are heavily dependent on rain-fed agriculture are also privy to that knowledge. The impacts of climate change continue to increase the vulnerability of over 60% of rural populations. It threatens our efforts to achieve food and water security. However, given the growing awareness around the impacts of climate change, it makes me question whether the unseen is really unseen. Is it perhaps ignored? Or maybe what is unseen is the action on the ground. I am a young South African living in Cape Town, a city that has experienced severe drought. I'm also the Food and Agriculture Youth Fellow with the UN High-Level Climate Champions team. And so, thinking about my lived experience and my current work, I thought I should share my call to action this week. I want to see more solutions on the ground. I want to see accelerated investment and adoption of innovative technologies and green infrastructure solutions. But more importantly, I want to see more young women like myself contributing to these solutions and intentionally included to tackle climate and water action. So what I want to share or leave behind this conversation is that we know the challenges. What we are missing is the implementation and accelerated action. For us to realize the SDG 6, that needs to be what we're discussing and investing in. Thank you.
Tokelo, thank you very much. Let's turn to our distinguished panel now. First of all, our speakers from the Egyptian government, His Excellency Mr. Swalem and His Excellency Mr. Essa. We'd love to hear more about COP27 and the objectives of that meeting, but also the links you see between climate and water. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, on behalf of the Egyptian Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation, I would like to thank Her Royal Highness Crown Princess Victoria of Sweden for supporting this and also for having us here. Our international partner SIWI for the long-standing relation and plans to come in the future. I would like also to thank and appreciate the government of Sweden for the continuous support and supporting this event, and definitely the government of the Netherlands for their, not only for supporting this event, for their support for the water sector in Egypt over the history and also for the coming years. Maybe a very quick overview about water sector in Egypt and why water is very important for us. Egypt is one of the poorest countries in terms of water resources. Our water share now is almost half of what we need. The water poverty, as you all know, 1,000 cubic meter per capita per year. We are now standing by 560 cubic meter per capita per year. So we almost have half what we need from our water resources. Just to highlight our main water resources, 97% of the water resources in Egypt are coming from the River Nile, which means the Nile is the source of life for the Egyptian people. Adding to that, the challenges of climate change. Before we come to the COP, this shows why climate change is very, very important, because we as Egyptians, we pay the invoice of climate change twice. First of all, as I said, 97% of our water resources is coming from the river, which means any climate change happening in the upper Nile, on the source of the Nile, it affects us, plus or minus. So hydrological extremes, we feel it in Egypt when there is a drought, like what happened in the 80s, or definitely will happen again in the future. It is going to be a very difficult time, but not only for us, also for the Nile Basin countries. That's why collaboration and transboundary collaboration is a significant issue for us. The second time we pay for climate change, the national impact of climate change on Egypt, sea level rise, The delta of Egypt is one of the most threatened globally in terms of sea level rise and the impact on our very non-renewable groundwater resources, the saltwater intrusion happening in the north coast, increasing temperature, you all know, it's going to increase also the water consumption. So we need more resources to supply the farmers with more water. We need more resources for industry, drinking water, etc., to cope with the increasing temperature in the country. Shifting season for agriculture, changing the irrigation way of irrigating and also the behavior. So that's why climate change for us is very important. And this brings us to the COP27. This is a main motivation that we have to push as much as we can to put water on the global agenda for water. We want to push in the COP27 to have water as one of the main outputs of the negotiations, that to have actions to be implemented, mitigation and adaptation actions out of the COP27. That's why this is a very important. What we are preparing for the COP27, going back to your point, we want to accelerate global climate change actions. We want to go for implementation, clear actions, clear indicators, time plan to reach specific milestones. So, and that's why emission reduction is one key word for us. Scaling up adaptation efforts is also a second issue that we have to achieve. Enhancing flows of appropriate finance, because without finance, there is no way to achieve the mitigation and the adaptation. These are the three key issues that we are, in general, trying to reach from the COP. So the COP for us, we want to move to delivery and the implementation, as I said before, timely and holistic action that scale balance between mitigation and adaptation. So we are going to push adaptation actions and using of technologies to solve water challenges. So in order to achieve all of that, also nice dreams that we have, but we want to have a clear and specific plan for that. One of these plans is going to be our global water initiative that we are going to put on the table in the COP27, which we call AWARE. And AWARE stands for Action for Water Adaptation and Resilience. That would be the global initiative that Egypt is going to submit. When I say Egypt is going to submit, doesn't mean that we are going to develop it alone. There is a long process that has been started over the last period with different organizations. I don't want to forget, but I'm going to mention a key partner, WMO, or the World Meteorological Organization, working with us, and many other partners who are involved in this development. The action plan, or the Action for Water Adaptation Resilience, AWARE, is tackling three main issues. First of all, decreasing water losses and improving supply, so water efficiency. So first, for the efficient use and its relation to climate change. Second, agree on policy and methods for cooperation in the water-related actions. And the last point, or the last pillar of this AWARE initiative, going to be promoting interlinkage between water and climate actions to achieve the SDGs, mainly SDG 6, as we all know. So this is going to be AWARE. In addition to that, we will have our water pavilion, and I think I can see many of our partners here. So we are collaborating in this water pavilion in order to brainstorm, to collaborate, to have a platform for discussion, in addition to the negotiations, of course. So our partners will be partners from Egypt, UK, Netherlands, Tajikistan, Germany, and also we have many organizations. Of course, SIWI is a key partner, FAO, Agua, SAO, and also IWMI. So these are the actions that we are going to take during the COP, the initiative, the water pavilion, but also the thematic day. We have a lot of events that will be organized during the thematic day. If you want, I can continue if I still have time.
Maybe we should continue with the other speakers. If there's more to say, we'll say it towards the end. If that's okay, I would like to fit some of the others in. But thank you very much for all of that. Mr. Esed, do you want to add some more there?
I will not Is it listen?
Yeah.
Okay, I will not add more to what His Excellency the Minister said, but again, I would like to assure our great honor to be here in the presence of Her Highness Crown Prince Victoria. We are very honored to be here with you, and I will speak to the youth because I'm afraid that what I heard was too much for us. This depression or the climate depression should not be there. This is why we have adopted the Agenda 2030. This is the aim. It is the sustainable development. And we cannot achieve sustainable development without peace. And we cannot achieve peace without the sustainable development. We are building the future for the future generations. When the lady from South Africa have spoken, and I have heard her comment saying that in South Africa, in Cape Town, they have reached a serious drought problem. I was there as the ambassador of Egypt to South Africa. I have been to Cape Town. They have asked our experience to help them to overcome the threat. They have reached the zero level of water. This is what we are facing now. This is what the coming generations should see what we are doing in order to build our road toward the 2030 agenda. The road to 2030 started years ago, but it will continue. And part of this road is the SDG 6. We need to implement SDG 6 in order to achieve in totality the 2030 agenda. In the middle of this road is the mid-revision of the 2023 revision of the United Nations, where we will identify where do we stand now and what do we need to reach the 2030 agenda. This is our action plan. This is where we want to go. The COP27 is part of this long road. We have a continuous process of work that we need to take in order to raise away the frustration and the depression that the coming generations are feeling. I wish you that this feeling would go away when you listen to our interventions here, not only to our interventions, but we see actions. We need to move from only promises into action plans. We need to implement. Pledges should be delivered. This is what we are asking for. Thank you very much.
Thank you both very much indeed. It was really fascinating, and it's really interesting to hear what's coming up for COP27, and we look forward to attending that meeting too. Now we're going to carry on with the session by watching another storytelling video, this time from Mrs. Bui Tin Tu Hien and her work on oceans and the source to sea action for the IUCN in Vietnam.
Hello from Vietnam. My name is Bui Tin Tu Hien and I work for IUCN. As a marine nation which has a coastline over 3,000 kilometers, Vietnam depends on a healthy oceans. It supports entire community and is crucial to our food securities and poverty alleviations. Vietnam is facing an alarming rate of environmental damage and water resource depletion amplified by climate change. It is forecasted that climate change and natural disaster will cost up to 11% of Vietnam's GDP by 2030. Ocean health is declining because of activity upstream. On land are filling the ocean with many different types of pollution, including massive amount of plastic litter every year. Currently, Vietnam ranks fourth globally of plastic waste pollution, while water pollution is expected to cost the country of 3.5% of its GDP by 2035. SIWI and IUCN, with support from GIZ, are working together with City of Hội An to implement the salt-to-sea approach and address the plastic pollution challenge affecting these beautiful coastal cities. This experience has made it clear for us that we need healthy freshwater ecosystem and we need to take action on land to have healthy oceans. However, we find that fragmented governance impeded effort to address the heavy burden at source. That is why we are working to bring salt-to-sea management to Vietnam, which address the linkages between ecosystem from salt to sea. We bring together all costs across to co-create solutions to restore and protect the oceans, saving our ocean. Start from land. Thank you.
Thank you for those insights from the ground, Hien. Thank you. Now, to hear more about the oceans, we'll turn to our next speaker, Mrs. Isabella Lövin.
Thank you so much, and thank you, SIWI, for inviting me to this important high-level panel, Your Royal Highness, all protocols observed. In 2017, we got out of the silos in the oceans community with the first ever UN Oceans Conference, which was held in New York. Sweden and Fiji co-hosted this for the first time. And for the first time, we actually discussed fisheries, mining, shipping, tourism, coastal development, all these things together. This was a real big step forward. And now the water community is getting together at the UN, and I warmly welcome this. And I also warmly welcome us having this discussion on how to collaborate more across these silos where we have the ocean people and we have the water people, and we really need to work together with source-to-sea approach to really get things done. But before I say anything more about the collaboration between ocean and water, I'd like to highlight as well that we can't achieve any of the Sustainable Development Goals if we don't address all of them together. We see the connection between oceans and climate, oceans and food safety, oceans and sustainable production and consumption, health, and all of this in turn leads to global security, equality between countries. So we need the whole Agenda 2030, actually, and we should not forget about that. We cannot achieve SDG 6 or SDG 14 without addressing the whole agenda. And the whole narrative of Agenda 2030 we need to keep in mind and at the center of everything what we're doing. And the goal of Agenda 2030 is actually to achieve a sustainable living planet for humans that could live in peace and security as stewards of this planet and not consumers. So now with that said, are there any good examples or experiences following the UN Oceans Conference? Absolutely. First of all, we had more than 1,000 voluntary commitments coming out of the conference and a follow-up conference this summer in Lisbon. So we have a process now continuing with the work on oceans. Secondly, we had two major outcomes. One was that the UN Secretary General appointed a special envoy on the oceans, Peter Thompson, whose work is very important. And he launched the Friends of Ocean Action platform at the World Economic Forum, which I'm also co-chairing. And this platform is constituting some 80 oceans champions. It's industries and companies, but it's also a network of global organizations that can really kind of influence on important processes that are happening. And two, I think important progress have been made only this year. One was on plastics. We actually managed to have an agreement at UNEA on a global plastics treaty. And here the Friends of Ocean Action actually used our leverage to get that across. Also a new body for chemical pollution was decided. And then we had in June an agreement to end harmful fisheries subsidies at the WTO, finally. This has been a long, long struggle. But I also like to stress that countries must urgently issue a formal acceptance of this abolishment of these subsidies. But what are the greatest challenges for the ocean agenda today? And I would say there are two, and they're the same ones that are the greatest challenges for the water agenda. One is time. We're running out of time. Only a few years ago, the cod stock here in the Baltic Sea collapsed. And now we see a big threat to the herring. This is happening now. We could have prevented it. For every day, we see more and more CO2 absorbed in our ocean, more and more acidity, more and more heat is absorbed in our ocean. But we don't see the same sense of urgency with the countries and those in power. Unfortunately, this weekend only, we were hoping for an agreement, a global agreement, to protect areas beyond national jurisdiction, everything outside 200 nautical miles. This has been going on, the negotiations to protect areas beyond national jurisdiction in the ocean has been going on for 15 years. But we didn't succeed this time either, so it's been postponed. That's, I would say, also because of the second big obstacle to the sustainability agenda, and that is, I would say, the polarization and the populism that is increasing in our world. So these are factors outside the ocean's agenda, but it's really impacting a lot. Democracy is under threat, rule of law is under threat, the Russian aggression against the Ukraine has created a lot of different obstacles for the multilateralist agenda to move forward as well. So these are some really important threats to sustainability. And I think what our young ambassadors were talking about in the beginning is so important, that we keep in mind that we cannot leave anyone behind if we're going to achieve the agenda. And Caroline, you mentioned trust. And I think we have to elevate this real important concept if we're going to come forward with our global work, that we should be able to trust each other and that we have a common goal. Now coming back to the water and ocean nexus, I think it's splendid that UNDESA is coordinating both UN Oceans and UN Water. But that is not enough. We need to have the coordination and the awareness on every level, on national level, regional level, on local level. And there's many benefits of working together. This is especially true as we adapt to climate change and biodiversity loss. Floods, droughts, storms, and sea level rise is the new reality, and it has to be planned for and mitigated by urban planners, industries, and governments. Saltwater intrusion will spoil freshwater and fertile soils, and waste and soil will flush out into our ocean due to violent storms if we don't try to avoid it. So, apart from that, we also have to be aware that all activities, all emissions made on land will eventually flow out into our ocean. So we have to expand our thinking around marine spatial planning. I don't think it's enough to plan the marine space. We need to plan the entire catchment area, the entire ecosystem. Source-to-sea planning has to begin. And in this context, I would like to commend the Swedish Parliament that has suggested to put in place a legally binding ocean environment law similar to a climate law, to make sure we have integrated marine policy. And I know the EU Commission is looking at this proposal and that the Committee of the Regions have endorsed it. So I think the best we can do as oceans and water communities is to work together and specifically focus on climate, because if we can't really stop emissions and have a sustainable planet, then we will not achieve the Agenda 2030 at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Levin. Now, turning to my next topic, and literally turning in my seat, we've got online with us Mrs. Farika Fink-Huija, who's going to be talking to us about biodiversity and the links it has with water. So please take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Good afternoon from Brussels. And of course, Your Royal Highness and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening now to me from Brussels. Last autumn, the EU had experienced very terrible flash floods, leading to a lot of loss of life and damage. Now, this summer, we experienced severe water shortage. And both, of course, are also life-threatening, as we know from everywhere in the world. And as we speak just now, 45% of Europe is lacking water, and every citizen is experiencing one form of lasting drought. And when I was in Abidjan earlier this year at the UNCCD, I was referring to 25% of the EU being in drought. And now I have to say 45. And unfortunately, it seems that we need these type of very horrible wake-up calls in order to go to action, hopefully go to real action towards 2023 UN Water Conference. And it's not that the EU was lacking on action. We have actually catered for the best water quality legislation in the world. Sewage water, groundwater, bathing water. But we have not done enough for water quantity. And now we have so low river levels, water levels, that we in certain areas really even may face drinking water shortages. And still I know that we are in a very luxury situation in comparison to others. And then we know that UN Secretary General has said we need to quadruple our efforts. I think it's clear that we need to be all in. We have to join our forces. And that's why from the EU side, we clearly see that we must use the opportunity of the next UN conference finally taking place after so many years to really make faster progress. Isabella just mentioned time and populism. So we really have to make faster progress on water for sustainable development and to interlink all of this. Everything has to be seen in a holistic way, because we have different global streams of work to do. Biodiversity is, I have to say a little bit more, but climate change, health, the entire SDG agenda. And you know that the EU is really a very strong supporter of international cooperation, especially on water. And one that is also very close to my heart is transboundary cooperation, such as the UNESCO Water Convention. Because if you don't cooperate, if you don't have a governance structure, the lack of access to water is, as we know, a security risk and a source of conflict. And this is happening everywhere. And even in the EU, water shortages might lead to certain distribution conflicts, say it like this. So we have clear priorities for the water conference. I will just briefly mention them. And when I mentioned UNESA, I really want to stress water governance. And as it was said before, local, regional, and global level, so a functioning water governance, but also this interlinkage with all the different threats that we have, biodiversity, but also to cater for food and energy systems, transboundary water cooperation. Governance is one, but you need to cooperate. You need to be trust building. And only when you're in a corporate structure, you do work together and rely on each other. Clearly financing, human rights related to water, and of course, voluntary commitments with clear and tangible actions. Why do I express so much for water governance? Because without that, you cannot operationalize SDG 6. And that's why, by the way, we would also really support the creation of a UN's SDG Specials Envoy on water. But also without a governance, you cannot really ensure inclusive, informed, and effective participation of civil society. And if we talk about all these governance structures, transboundary, I think we also should really go for globalization of the UNESCO Water Convention. We have several examples, and our Egyptian colleagues just mentioned it. The importance of certain rivers for certain regions, it is important to also see that in a global context. But water, and now I come to biodiversity, water is key for biodiversity and food. And therefore, I am a little bit surprised that in the concept note or paper that you put out, you were not referring to the biodiversity COP15, which is taking place in Canada at the end of the year after the COP27. And I think it's missing in your list because what are we doing? It's a biodiversity framework with actions. We are striving for actions for all countries, all stakeholders, and across the all entire UN system. So let me perhaps a little bit illustrate why it is important for the water context. Because one of the targets that we would like to go is to advocate for the famous 30+30. What does it mean? To protect 30% of land and inland waters and at least 30% of the oceans. So only when we cater for this protection on a global level can we change and make really change in the water management and all of this. And the whole idea of the Biodiversity COP is to support targets for improving the different ecosystem services. Freshwater ecosystems, river, lakes are all absolutely crucial. I already mentioned it for drinking water, but also for climate change adaptation, for disaster risk reduction, my colleague will speak after me, but also for the economic development, economic sectors, whether it's tourism in our case, or shipping, or breweries, or something much more fundamental. And we experience it now with this lasting drought in Europe. Once again, we see without water, we have really problems economically. There are other conferences which I would like to refer to briefly as well, which are perhaps a bit specific, but are stepping stones in this holistic approach. The Conference of the Parties on the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands of International Importance, I think we should look at that. This is taking place in October, but we also have the meeting of the parties of the African-Eurasian Waterbirds Agreement in November. Specific, I know, but important because they all improve the integrity of water-based ecosystems and therefore are relevant for water-related biodiversity. And as I said, we look at it very holistically. We know that ourselves, we have to do a lot of homework. We just proposed our nature restoration law to restore 25,000 kilometers of European rivers, so removal of barriers, but also restore peatlands, which are extremely important again for climate change. So wherever you started, whether from the ocean side, from the climate side, from the biodiversity side, all of this links in one way or another to water because water is life. This is the starting point. So water and water cooperation is all about sustainable development, but it's also about partnerships. It's, as I said in the beginning, about peace and security. And most of all, it's about us, about our future. So you can count on us to deliver, but I think we should also factor in very much making progress on the Biodiversity COP, on agreeing on certain goals and targets and mechanisms like review mechanisms, so on, as an extremely important stepping stone to making also the water conference a success. We need a holistic approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frederica. That was very interesting. Thank you. Now we're going to turn to our last thematic subject for discussion, disaster risk reduction. We're going to be seeing a storytelling video from Lamia Mohsin from Bangladesh, who, just like Toleko earlier, is the UNFCCC High-Level Champions Youth Fellow.
Hi, this is Lamia Mohsin, and I'm a Youth Fellow with the UN High-Level Climate Champions. And I'm here to talk today about the interconnectedness between water and disaster risk response. Impact of climate change is most acutely expressed through water, which has historically defined and enabled human development. Today, 90% of natural disasters are water-related, and a lack of clean water threatens to limit economic growth in many developing countries. By 2050, it is estimated that demand for water will increase by 55%, and the number of people living with water scarcity will grow to 3.1 billion. As the founder of an organization standing up for the underprivileged, which is a youth-driven voluntary initiative that seeks to provide humanitarian assistance during various socioeconomic crises and in the event of natural disasters, we have completed more than 15 projects, reaching more than 2,000 people across Bangladesh. Recently, destructive flooding was witnessed in the northeastern regions of Bangladesh, which caused severe crisis of urgent food and drinking water supplies. Through crowdfunding, we were able to connect with local volunteers at the grassroots level to provide necessary financial support and distribute emergency relief. In terms of lesson learned, I would like to say that the roots of inadequacy in natural resource management, including water, lie not only in poor financing or technology and natural scarcity of water, but also include poverty, inequality, and unequal power relationships. Providing opportunities for water user associations, NGOs, and community-based organizations to become involved in strategic planning and implementation of disaster reduction is a commonly accepted approach to identify vulnerabilities, reducing risk, and improve monitoring and quicker coordinated response during a water-related disaster. Floods and droughts already impose huge socioeconomic costs, and climate variability will make matters extremely worse. Addressing the issues poses one of the greatest challenges facing the world. Therefore, I support, see, and recognize the importance of synergy between action on disaster and water action, and excited to join forces on the road to the UN 2023 Water Conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Mohsin. On stage next to me, we are very pleased to have our policy expert, Mr. Ricardo Mena. Mr. Mena, tell us your perspective on how water and disaster risk reduction are connected.
Thank you very much. And let me start by mentioning that it's a true honor to have the presence of Your Royal Highness, Crown Princess Victoria of Sweden with us. And let me thank also SIWI and the Government of Netherlands for inviting the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction to be here with you and bring the DRR perspective. And perhaps I should start where the lady that just spoke left and mention that, as you all know, the risk and water are closely related. Actually, based on our data from the past 20 years, 9 out of 10 disasters caused by natural hazards have been triggered by water-related hazards. So this is really a wake-up call for everybody. They also accounted for nearly 95% of infrastructure losses and damages. There is also a close nexus between climate change and water-related disasters. You know very well the IPCC reports, and according to them, climate change will lead to an excess of deficit of water across time and regions, resulting in more intense droughts and floods. We just heard from the European Union on how the situation has been in Central Europe this year. The climate emergency, COVID-19 pandemic, and the looming food and energy crisis have also demonstrated that disasters have increasingly compounded effects and cascading impacts that are felt across geographies and sectors. We are indeed living in an era of systemic risk. Due to these linkages, if we cannot agree on how to better manage water resources, we will not be able to reduce disaster risks. Conversely, if we cannot reduce disaster and climate risks, we cannot protect vulnerable communities and sustain our valuable water resources. But let me mention some opportunities and solutions. To begin with, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which is the global blueprint for reducing disaster risk and avoid the creation and reduce existing risk by strengthening resilience and embedding risk reduction into the very DNA of sustainable development. The Sendai Framework was developed through an intergovernmental process, but with a very strong multi-stakeholder participation and engagement. Its expected outcome seeks to substantially reduce disaster risk and losses in lives, livelihoods, health, and the assets of persons, businesses, communities, and countries. This includes developing prevention-centric disaster risk reduction strategies that co-benefit risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and water resources management. Mainstreaming the use of disaster risk assessments for drought and floods are further tools, as well as transboundary cooperation within river basins along coastlines. Further, the concurrent midterm reviews of both the Water Action Decade and the Sendai Framework in 2023 offer a unique opportunity to coherently promote risk-informed development while sustainably managing water resources and associated ecosystems. We were just discussing with Henk Ovink about this a short while before we started, and we of course agreed that there is a need for greater synergies from both sides. It is crucial to ensure this synergy in the outcomes of both midterm reviews while informing related mechanisms like the global stocktake of the Paris Agreement and the post-2020 biological diversity framework. Such a synergy strengthens on our pursuit of Sustainable Development Goal 6 through better management of interconnected water-related risks. While there are many opportunities indeed to seek this synergy, I would like to highlight two crucial ones. First, the aspect of water-related infrastructure, which, as you know, is highly prone to disasters, and not only for irrigation and personal use, but many other uses as well. There is an urgent need to enhance infrastructure resilience, including through nature-based solutions that build adaptive capacity while at the same time reducing disaster risk. Second, we need to strengthen our multi-hazard monitoring systems around water and other hazards, forging partnerships to attain the UN Secretary General's call to action for early warning for all, led by WMO, within the next 5 years. This will be, of course, one salient aspect of the discussions on the COP27 as well. Overall, the need to apply a think resilience approach, meaning using a lens of disaster risk to inform everything we do around sustainable development, is a necessity. A comprehensive disaster and climate risk management approach to be better integrated, DRR and climate action, is also key to optimize available resources. And of course, resilience must start and conclude at the local level. We need to empower communities and reflect the voices of the most affected and vulnerable in our policies to ensure, indeed, that, as our youth delegates were mentioning, that no one is left behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mina. Now, this panel's already been full of insights, but we have a little bit of time, I think, for questions. There's a question, I believe, from the audience down here. Where are you? There you go, please.
So we were going to take an online question, but there were no online questions, so I will pose one. And I'm Josh Newton from SIWI. And we've heard about this a lot, but there's a large focus on integration within the 2030 agenda and in between the goals, and that's much easier said than done. So what is your recommendations from your respective thematic areas that you've presented today as we go towards the UN 2023 Water Conference to make that integration happen?
Okay, so let me just repeat that question for anyone who didn't hear. What are your recommendations and wishes for how to move forward towards the 2023 UN Water Conference? I'd like to take answers from all of you, and if you don't mind keeping them short, maybe 30, 40 seconds or something if most. Maybe we can start with our original speaker. Would you mind just saying, what do you hope will come from the UN 2023 speak?
I think water, it's not only a challenge, water is also an opportunity that we need to consider and take it as an idea to the conference in 2023. When I speak about water as an opportunity, if you take mitigation, for example, as an opportunity, speaking of wastewater management or wastewater technologies,
Technologies can be different. Scientists have been showing us that wastewater can be a source of methane, and methane can be also used as a biogas or be a source of biogas, and biogas can be used as an energy for supplying the required energy for the process of wastewater treatment. So taking from the wastewater and treating it using the same energy that exists. The same also, if speaking of technology, when it comes to desalination. Speaking of desalination for food, might be a little bit too early, but science has also showing us that there is an opportunity that desalination in the future could be used for food production. Imagine or think about the photovoltaic, for example. 10 years ago and today, the prices of energy produced from PV has been reduced by almost 90%. So now speaking of 2 or 3 US dollar cent. If we think the same and desalination cost, 50%, 40 to 50% of the desalination cost is a cost of energy. So the cost of energy has been reduced dramatically. If the membrane technology or the desalination technology reduced by the same amount in the coming 10 years, hopefully, of course, based on science and technology, and using the water in a more efficient way, producing more with less, this will help us to make desalination economically visible to produce food, considering, of course, that desalination today, it's not a green technology. What we're going to do with the brine is another type of research. So these type of technological-based solutions, I think, will help us to make water as an opportunity for mitigation. Adaptation, I'm not going because the time will not allow me, but producing more with less, more crop per drop, all these technologies, hydroponics, aquaponics, recirculating aquaculture system, super intensive fish production, all of these are technologies that will allow us to adapt to water scarcity and deal with the water in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Issa.
So, again, I would like to stress on the position of Egypt concerning the 2023 mid-period revision. Egypt have proposed a structural for the five interactive dialogue, which covers universal access to water and sanitation, improving the water quality and restoring ecosystem, addressing water scarcity and its impact, transboundary cooperation and water for peace, and last but not least, water and climate. This year is very important for us. We are linking between climate and water through the COP27 and the mid-year revision, the UN 2023. This is our goal now, to encourage partners to interactive dialogue in order to at least agree on the 5 thematic ideas that we have proposed, and then we can find the way forward to reach 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Levin.
Thank you. Well, I think water is something that we all are dependent on it. Every day we need to drink water. Our food is produced with water. We see water around us. We even have water in our own bodies. And I see the water conference, UN Water Conference, actually being an opportunity to address the climate crisis, the planetary crisis, in a way that can really touch people in a new way. We've had the climate conferences now for 27 years, and we're still not making enough progress. And I think what the water agenda really can show us is that this is about our own lives. And I really hope that that message will get across with the water conference. And I think the lady from the Commission was mentioning the COP15 and the biodiversity COP coming after that. I think that's an enormously important kind of stepping stone towards protecting biodiversity. Because I don't think, of course, we must also promote technological solutions to secure water for humanity. But the best security, life insurance that we have is actually restoring natural ecosystems. So we really make sure that this planet can continue producing fresh and healthy water and conserve healthy oceans that can produce food for us and sustain a resilient and stable climate for all future generations. So I think it's for me, it's an opportunity with clear communication, clear message to the world and to humanity that we cannot survive without water, and in order to secure water we need healthy ecosystems and a healthy planet.
Good way to come to our next speaker, Mrs. Florica Fink-Huijo. What were your ambitions and aspirations for the UN 2023 conference?
Well, to a certain extent, I think I mentioned it already. I think I have an echo. Do you understand me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, fine, because I have an echo here. But I already mentioned the priorities. I said governance and the linkages, the aspect of this human rights. But I think one of them must link to the nexus, to the integrate. And it's actually quite that this year we are open as Rio Convention Summit. The one on drought in Africa about water. Summer Sheikh will have a very component, and COP15 again, ocean, freshwater ecosystems, and again water. So these are all stepping stones to the UN conference. And I think if we do factor in all our regulatory approaches, in our advocacy, the importance of water, get further. Because if you hear, most people talk about reducing carbon footprint. We actually also talk about reducing the water footprint, or in general, the material footprint. And if you factor that in, as the minister was just saying, in the context of the energy and water nexus, we will make these steps that will hopefully get us out of the crisis. Because I just want to give an example when we talk about energy, and I'm grateful that the minister mentioned it. We hadn't had it so far. Water is used throughout the energy industry, but at the same time, when we talk about water systems, we need a lot of energy for collecting, pumping, treating, desalination, as it was said. But all of this now with innovation, we might also get new combinations. So I think this holistic approach, and it was also said in relation to disaster risk reduction, I think then if you have that mindset of saying this is, and I come back to what I think it was John from Kenya said it in the beginning, water is a natural resource, and all natural resources are limited. So we have to be careful in how we treat them. So that's basically what we would contribute and also hope to see.
Okay, thank you, Florica. And last but not least, Ricardo, how about you? In a short amount of time, if you can just describe your priorities then for the 2023 conference.
30 seconds. I mean, a lot has been said already. Yeah, 30 seconds. So I think that we have to approach this water conference with a future generation view. And I think that I echo very much the message that was said by our youth representatives. We need to make sure that future generations have at least the same access to water that we have had in our times. And if you are a grandfather, and I am one, you know, we really have to think about our grandchildren and future generations. If we now cannot manage to get things right, future generations are going to suffer a lot. And I think that the youth have the possibility of really defining this at this moment. Partly also because you have not built too many siloed thinking about things. You are still looking at all sectors and looking at everything that, you know, brings them together. So you are very well positioned to be the advocate. So I really think that it has to be a future generation looking meeting for it to be successful.
Thank you, Ricardo. And thank you very much to all of our panel. It's been a fascinating discussion full of challenges, but also, I think, some hope for all the ways that we can move forward. That conversation could have lasted another hour, I think. But meanwhile, can I ask you just to give the panel one round of applause, and then if you can take your seats on there. Thank you very much. Now, representing the co-hosts of the UN 2023 Water Conference, I'm now delighted to introduce Henk Irvink, who's the Special Envoy for International Water Affairs for the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and Sultan Rahimzoda, Special Envoy of the President of the Republic of Tajikistan on water and climate. Please come up on stage. And Henk and Sultan, I mean, you will talk amongst yourselves. Please take a seat. But I'd like to just or stand if you wish. I'd just like to sort of maybe throw a challenge to you to reflect upon what we've heard. We've heard a lot of ideas. What have you heard that sort of inspired you and made you think? And then maybe continue with those reflections for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much a lot. And thank you, Henk, for giving me the first floor here. I would like to start basically first on behalf of us, Tajikistan and the Netherlands, to thank Her Royal Highness Crown Princess Victoria of Sweden being with us. Your Royal Highness, thank you very much. Your participation is really highly appreciated. It's very important for us and inspires us in the way towards 2023 conference. The way which is not really easy, but really very interesting. I would like also to thank Excellencies Ministers, distinguished panelists, and our young friends Carolina and John, for sharing with us today their thoughts, their ideas, and their expectations from this historical gathering in March next year in New York. So before reflection of the findings from this panel, I started basically speaking on behalf of Tajikistan and the Netherlands. And yes, water already united us, so we can speak on behalf of each other. So, and my first message to all of you, to all of the world, let's be united for water. And then now, the general findings from the discussion we had. The first is engagement. Engagement is really important. And it was mentioned first, and the priority, I think, the youth. Really, youth engagement in this process is very important since they are our future. And we have to think about our future. So it's inspired us that we have basically the new developments with engagement of the youth around water. And thank you for your leadership being with us in this process. But I think that it is very important also the involvement of all stakeholders, marginalized groups, women, private sector, indigenous people, local communities, governments, and also high dignitaries. I hope much that in this way, more dignitaries, high-ranking dignitaries, will join us in this process, inspiring us with their advices and with their presence. So in terms of the engagement, basically, we have our process, inclusive one, and that means that we are welcome contribution and input of everybody, all stakeholders, all friends, all groups in this process, and you are welcome, and we appreciate your willingness and cooperation with us. Second is ownership. It was mentioned really, without ownership, it will be very complicated to achieve the goals. And then when we are talking about the ownership, I think the next is the leadership. And most importantly, political leadership. It was mentioned basically, when we are talking about the leadership, it goes to actions or commitments for actions, which help us to accelerate our actions towards achieving the SDG 6. And it was mentioned that the achieving SDG 6 will help us basically achieving the other SDGs. That is really important. And for that, basically, we have Water Action Agenda. Please join us with your commitments, with your actions in this process. The third one is already mentioned, actions and commitments, and the challenge we are facing today. And it was mentioned basically challenge in transboundary water cooperation, the climate impact, the disaster risk reduction, on drinking water supply, the food, and many, many others. And for that, we have in our preparation process cross-sectorality. So the approach, cross-sectoral approach, is being used for us. So all sectors should be involved in this process so to have a big success in 2023. And then in terms of the themes, there was some ideas regarding the themes. I think the opportunity ahead of us. So already we launched the preliminary themes for interactive dialogues of the conference. So we already basically took note your ideas, so they will be taking into account while finalizing the themes of the interactive dialogues. But it is an opportunity for you too, to come to New York on 24th and 25th of October, when PGA will organize a meeting to finalize the themes of the interactive dialogues, as well as the other modalities of the UN 2023 conference. So, then I give the floor to Henk now to continue, please.
Thank you, Sultan, and thank you, Your Royal Highness, for joining us, and all leaders from Egypt and across the world. Youth, first and foremost. Thank you, Sultan. We joke a bit that we become brothers, but it's becoming true. But we want to expand the family, as we say. I have to admit I'm pretty much afraid, in a way, or scared is perhaps a better word, to have the responsibility of a conference without actually a real mandate. Because we have all these partners talking to us, saying, hey, from climate and biodiversity, hey, think about us, think about us. But they are mandated. If you want to call someone at the UN on water, nobody picks up the phone. Or you could say everybody picks up the phone. But it's not organized. Not for nothing, it took 46 years to get an agreement, thanks to the leadership of Tajikistan, first and foremost, leading the Water Action Decade process within the UN, to get an agreement among member states to come together. I was young in the first water conference. Well, I suppose I won't see another water conference in my life, leaving 46 years left. So it's a little bit also now or never, without actually that mandate. But I'm hopeful, because when we start to talk about water, you know you have to involve everyone, because water is connected to everything and every sector and every interest. Then the question is, how do you do that knowing that there's no negotiation? Well, actually, we're pretty lucky without that negotiation, because we know what negotiations mean in the context of the UN. We talk about text and wording and wordsmithing, and then we yellow text and red line and etc. And it doesn't lead to the actions, the implementation of actions and the commitments. So in that sense, we're lucky with the Water Action Agenda that we do this call to the world to bring your commitments and actions forward. But also we, as co-host and our partners, will chase you to bring bold and transformative commitments. Because otherwise, why do a conference? Conferences themselves don't change the world. It is on us and our responsibility to bring commitments across sectors, across silos, across the communities and regions to match and marry commitments that really make a difference in the context of what we want to achieve. And that is what we can't do alone. And the call from the youth to include 30% of the young in the preparations and the commitments of this conference and in the decision making, and ensure that 30% of the young below 30 are included in its implementation in the positions to help them lead, is very much embraced. That not only demands a safe space where we can build trust, and we hope this conference can provide that safe space, it also demands that we have the courage, the guts, if you would say it a little bit more streetwise, that we shy away from vested interest, that we step aside of the policies of the past that actually got us where we all are. And the panel, in that sense, was a provocation towards themselves, and of course to us, because we're all in this same boat leading to a disastrous future if only we change course. This conference provides us with an excellent opportunity to change course, because it comes with commitments by all and across all sectors and silos that we need. So we build trust, we create a safe space, but it demands the courage of all of us to come forward in partnership across all sectors and silos in society to make that happen. And you can count on us. You have our phone numbers and email addresses. There's no way you can't reach us to work with you, to support you and empower you towards the conference and beyond. Because in that sense, we need catalytic actions, but the conference is the catalyst for the actions that we need. And we will make sure that the day after the conference, somewhere around April 1, Fool's Day, will not be a Fool's Day for water. It will be a day that we feel empowered to move ahead with accelerated speed. And we do this as brothers, but we can only do it with you as a water family, and we look forward to work with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you both very much indeed. That was incredibly inspiring. You've gained a lot of brothers and sisters, I think. Thank you both very much, Henk and Sultan. I think we're feeling very enthusiastic about the upcoming water conference. Excuse me. But now, last but not least, let me bring on SIWI's Executive Director, Torgny Holmgren, on the stage for the synthesis and the wrap-up of this session.
Thank you, Alok, and thank you, panelists. What a great discussion we have had this afternoon. 50 years ago, we met here in Stockholm, when others might be met, for the Stockholm Human Environment Conference. That was 50 years ago, across the street. That was the first UN conference on environment. 45 years ago, world leaders met in Mar del Plata in Argentina for the first UN water conference, the one and only. And I will more or less quote Henk, because I started to count. 46 years later, after 2023, we end up in 2068. This is the first time I take that year in my mouth. I don't know why you've done it. We cannot wait that long. We have to act now. And this is my takeaways, 15 one-liners from the discussion today. Number 1, engage the youth, empower them with knowledge. Number 2, go for cross-generational, bring in the youth. In this conference, we have 40% under the age of 35. Let that be the UN conference as well. Number 3, go for real achievable outcomes. That is what counts. Number 5, well, we heard from our colleagues from the youth panel earlier on this morning, or this afternoon, I mean, that we should also raise awareness of SDGs in remote areas. We know in this hall what SDGs are all about, but I think also we need to think beyond the borders of Stockholm for SDGs. One very important thing, I think, this is the conference theme this year, seeing the unseen, the value of water. One of our colleagues mentioned the unseen today is the ignore, the no action. Coming back to that, we need the action also to be implemented later on. 6, address all SDGs simultaneously. Source to sea, water, oceans, 14. We cannot go on in silos. We need to bring them all together. That, I think, is very important. From our colleagues from Egypt, very encouraging. Your preparation for the upcoming COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, emissions, of course, but also adaptation and water, and of course, finance. And also, you mentioned about your lifeline, the Nile River, and what climate change might impact upstream. And I think a few partners or policies mentioned, outcome of the UN Water Conference might be like we have in the ocean community, an envoy for water. We are running out of time. We are seeing that oceans might become from carbon sinks to carbon emitters. And the same goes with water. We have crossed the planetary boundary of water this year. And this is a very dangerous course we are taking. So this conference is very timely. We have to address water, oceans together. Trust is needed among cross-generations, among countries and partners in the upcoming conference. Very interesting from our colleague from European Union. Last year we have too much water in part of Europe. Flooding in Belgium and Germany. This year, too little water. So the quantity of water is becoming top priority in this part of the world. Number 12, I think, on my list. Water governance is key to achieve the SDGs. Governance, how we manage water. And that is also our experience in SIWI. Irrespective if you have little or plenty of water in a country, in a region, in a city, it's how you govern it that is most crucial. Number 14, bring together the different processes underway. We have the biodiversity COP, and 6-7 years ago we had the Paris Agreement, the Sendai Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction, SDGs, and also Addis Ababa Action for Climate, or for Finance, for Development. I think we also need to link, we should not have conferences in silos in between each other. Finally, to get where we want, addressing climate change is the business. And with that, I will quote some of our colleagues, water is an opportunity, not only a challenge. Thank you for being here this afternoon.
Thank you, Torgny. With that, we close this high-level panel on harnessing global agendas on the road to 2023. I want to express our gratitude to Her Royal Highness, the Crown Princess Victoria of Sweden, for being here today and attending the session. Please join me and thank Her Royal Highness by getting on your feet and standing up, please. Thank you. I also want to thank both our in-house and virtual participants. I hope you've all enjoyed this session. Have a great time at the rest of World Water Week, and thank you very much for coming.